Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our panel. Fantastic to see you all. Absolutely awesome that we've got this great panel for you. Just a couple of things. So we're going to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly, about scaling agility over the last 10 years, 10 years plus maybe. And our panelists are going to share their experience, their insights, their knowledge about their experiences, all to do with that challenge of scaling agility. I'd like also to welcome the listeners of the Weekly Reboot podcast.
Who's a listener of the Weekly Reboot?
Excellent.
Soon to be listening.
Sign up now. We're recording this session, so if you don't want to be recorded, unfortunately, you'd have to leave. Sorry, no way around that. You can creep out on all fours, that's fine. I'd like to hand over to Alex, the host of the Reboot podcast.
Hello, welcome to the Weekly Reboot, your regular Friday debrief of things I've heard and seen coming from the agile community here in Melbourne and beyond. You've probably heard me say that before if you're a listener. So we have a wonderful panel of luminaries that we've bribed to be here and lay bare their souls as we kind of pick through their collective brains on the good, the bad and the ugly of scaling agility and scaling agile ways of working. So I'm just going to ask them all to introduce themselves. So it's basically just, and for your convenience, name where they're working and where they're working at the moment, where they're scaling agile ways of working, or where they've worked in the past that, where they've been doing that. And then we'll kick off with, we're going to start with the bad, but intros first.
Hi, I'm Jeanette Peterson. I am currently working at RMIT. I'm an innovations delivery manager, specifically working on delivering innovations that relate to fairly significant problems that we may have across the organisation. I've also worked at Red Cross Blood Services and a heap of other organisations.
Hey everyone, I'm Renee Troughton. I work at BCG. I'm currently working with a client on a 2,000 or 3,000 person transformation. Have also done multiple bank transformations and many other industry ones as well. Been in the agile space for about 16 years.
Hi there, I'm Robin Elliott and I work for the National Broadband Network, the NBN. And the part of my job that I'm passionate about at the moment is how we're changing the enterprise level, the senior level of the organisation, so that it is more attuned and more able to cope with the agile ways of working.
Fantastic. Over here.
My name's Mark Barber. I work for a consultancy startup called Adaptivate. At the moment I'm involved in a very large transformation and a very large mining organisation here in Melbourne, and experience over the years includes REA, MYOB, Ozpost, the usual Melbourne agile companies, I guess.
Hi everyone, my name is Penelope Barr. I've just left ANZ and moving to Allen's law firm to help them transform from an innovation and product development perspective. I've worked at Census, a couple of not-for-profits, super partners, and a couple of roles at ANZ in terms of transformation.
Lucky last, my name's Tom Varsavsky. I'm the Chief Engineer at REA Group, famous for realestate.com.au. Pretty famous, I think, Melbourne startup stories, so looking forward to sharing some of the stories today.
Excellent, thanks very much. And so we're going to kick off first with the bad. So this is going to be a game of 3/3, and the timer will go and then we'll swap into the ugly and the good just to kind of keep us on track. And there will be opportunity, we hope, for you to ask questions as well. So first of all, if we could ask the panellists some tales that they're willing to share about what are some of the bad things that they've witnessed, let's just say witnessed, at these various scaling adventures that they've been on. Ladies, would you like to kick us off?
So I think one of the things we experience is that there's a bit of similarity between people and goldfish, and you have to say the same things again and again because people have busy lives. And to start changing that mindset, you have to have a lot of patience. And we've just moved, like many other companies, through the change of a financial year. And so the same people ask the same questions that they asked a year ago because we do things differently now. And you have to be able to move on and say explain with as much enthusiasm you did the first time, the 100th time?
I think some of the challenges that I've seen, like scaling bad-wise at the moment, there seems to be an ongoing trend towards this profession of agile coaching being more something that someone falls into after a few weeks or barely any experience inside of agile. I think we've lost the craftsmanship of agile, and we've lost the focus around what the intent is behind it, and it's led certainly to an over-commoditisation, but also not necessarily the outcomes that we'd intended at the start of doing agile.
I think I've seen some quite interesting bad ones, but from a very interesting perspective is around financing. So for some reason we go through a process and we decide to scale up just because suddenly we got to the end of the financial year and we had a whole heap of money left over and we needed to spend it. So I think that's really very tricky because I've seen on a number of occasions where we could have backed out and we didn't. So I think that's particularly complicated, and I think we should become a lot better at that.
I think for me, an example of the bad over the last few years is associating agile transformation with cost reduction or efficiency, transformations, and it kind of seems to follow in a lot of cases huge rounds of redundancies and things like that. And I'd like to see it separated from that. I think we do need to cut costs in some places, and I think it's fair to say that's what we're doing. And then maybe that agile transformation is about making it better for the people that are left behind, rather than it all being intertwined and suddenly agile coaches are part of this movement of getting rid of people, and people are becoming all kind of, anxiety driven and things like that.
I think the bad, in my experience, is largely around the lack of alignment to vision and strategy. So I just want to check, do most people follow AFL football here? So recently I was talking to Paul Roos, who you may know who was a very successful AFL coach, and we were talking about OKRs and the impact of those. And he was talking about how if you're in a football team and you're a coach, the entire football team understands that they are there to win a grand final. It doesn't matter if you're 10 years out or you're 5 years out, you're 2 years out, or this is the year you're winning. Every person in the team, and the team is holistic, whether you're washing the tea towels or you're the captain or you're the coach, they are absolutely committed to winning that grand final. And if we think about an organisation strategy, we have the organisation strategy that starts at the top, and then it gets rolled down. So then we have the interpretation from the technology area about what the organisation strategy means for them, and then the marketing area interprets the organisation strategy for them, and then the risk area, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So each time the organisational strategy is being interpreted in a slightly different way, and so we're losing the focus on the overall we're losing our focus in terms of the organisational alignment. So if you're thinking about that from an overall strategic perspective or an OKR perspective, we're slightly misaligned each time. And so if you're trying to, in this, I can't remember who said that each day, every day we're coming to work to try to kind of align from a purpose point of view, and we're trying to understand what we're supposed to be doing each time, and we're forgetting what we're supposed to be doing. It becomes quite difficult if you're misaligned in terms of what the strategic intent and your role in contributing to the strategy is. And I think that's where the misalignment for me comes in major transformations.
Yeah, for me, the bad. I think one of the things for us is we're not transforming. Like we actually as an organisation don't really talk about agile, to be honest. Like if you walk into the building, we don't. It's just the way we are. But actually one of the things I struggle with at the moment is because it's in the water, it's in the way we do things, it's kind of implied. A lot of it's actually not written down, and we kind of forget, I think, sometimes to relearn the lessons we've learned many years ago. So we have, the organisation turns over at 20%, 15-20% every year, so we have a flush of new people coming through, and this assumed kind of elitist knowledge that we have that we don't actually have, and I kind of don't like it when we as an organisation kind of take that position. I'd rather us be humble and go back to the agile principles, agile roots. Why are we doing this? Is this ritual really delivering what we need to do, and really kind of drive the questioning of kind of our rituals and behaviours in the organisation. So that's a roundabout way of saying I'm trying to encourage us to keep challenging ourselves, because we can always get better.
I'd take some questions from the audience with respect to the bad aspects of agility. Anything you'd like to understand, or even if there's something you'd want to share as well, and get a viewpoint from our panellists. So happy to open the floor if anybody would like to ask a question.
Simon?
Well,
Oh, no, it's all right.
I'll just yell.
You yell and we'll repeat it. Yeah.
So interested to know, with so many new people coming in, and probably younger people who've never seen anything other than agile, does that change how people relate to agile? Like, if you've never known otherwise, and nobody even talks about why we do it, people just cargo cult it, and that works fine.
There's a little bit of that, but I think for us, like I think of us as more of a product organisation, and agility and measure, test, learn, and all those things that we do that we call agile are just part of the way you do products. So when we induct people into the company, we talk more about that than we do about agile's about running a stand-up or releasing often, or like all these things. So we talk more about the product that we're trying to build. And we do induct people through. We have a pretty comprehensive induction program. We have a training program. People sit in teams and kind of absorb those things. But we don't really have an agile fundamentals induction. So maybe that's an opportunity for us.
I'm sure there's a couple of people on the panel who can help.
Yeah.
No comment.
So the question was about cargo culting?
Yeah, people coming in who haven't learned about agile and haven't known any different.
Yeah.
I think that is increasing, and that in some ways is making the everyday work easier, in that you have a larger pool of knowledge. I don't think it necessarily is helping at an enterprise level or a scaled level. And interestingly, we have just been asked to consider a fundamentals course and developing one, but I think it's from the perspective of not fundamentals of agile, it's from the perspective of how does NBN work, so that you can bring your knowledge to the company and then understand perhaps the way we scale, or the particular quirks, or the strange language, or whatever, so that you can bring your knowledge and translate it into being effective. And that's something that we weren't expecting to do maybe even 12 months ago.
I can honestly say, from my perspective, I haven't been through. I've worked in pretty much every environment. I've worked through Prince 2. I've worked through Agile, Waterfall. I mean, I've been a project manager for in excess of 20 years. So most of my contracts have been a year or less. So I've worked at a lot of places. And I haven't done formalised Agile training, but I believe in the methodologies of Agile. So I think that as long as people understand the methodologies of how Agile works, and they're fairly, they're open-minded to it, I think that anybody can learn that way. And I honestly feel like, of all the workplaces I've been in, and they cross lots of different industries, is that we do seem to still have a combination of maybe younger people coming through who are very agile focused, but then people with years of experience that have worked across a number of different methodologies, and that we're getting that nice, I find that you seem to get quite a good mix. So I think it works across both ways fairly well. But who knows what it's going to be like as we progress. So if you think about some of the methodologies of the 80s and 90s, and now I'm completely showing my age, but if you think about those, we have definitely moved in a path, haven't we, to now. So in 10 years' time, who knows where we'll be at.
Thank you very much. We're just going to move on to the second third. So we're going to hopefully talk about what's ugly. So that's really anything that's a bit weird or messy, a bit sort of strange from your experience. So not the, bright, shiny, polished, scaled agile frameworks, but the reality on the shop floor. Maybe if we start on the other side of the panel.
Look, I think for us, a lot of the challenges we have at the moment are scaling challenges, and we're a product organisation. We've got about 650 people in tech, just roughly about 70 squads working on stuff. Each one of those has got a product line that they're delivering every day. And when you stand back from it, you say, oh, there's 70 products or 70 squads, 70 initiatives, whatever it might be. When you stand back from it, it's actually one product, realestate.com.au. It makes $1 billion. So a lot of the challenges we've got is how do you coordinate all of those squads to common outcomes that can't really be achieved in any one squad, because the things that are big and impactful can't be done autonomously in one single squad. So a lot of the things we're struggling with at the moment is actually like going back to things that are maybe don't sound very agile, like program management and investment boards and coordination of programs of work across multiple squads. And I'm avoiding the PMO term because we don't want to go there, but trying to solve some of those kind of problems in an agile way is the challenge that we're facing into at the moment.
I think the ugly that I would talk about is a similar thing in terms of scaling. At ANZ, 500 squads across 6 regions and 15,000 people in a very short amount of time. 75 coaches being brought in at the same time. So some people being brought in from outside and some people being recruited internally, and being really time constrained to bring people up to speed and then also educate others. And the scale of that is things like doing QBR sessions, so quarterly business review sessions in a stadium, because there's no space to do QBR sessions. But also while you're doing that, then throw in, doing it all digitally, because doing it in a stadium is not enough of a challenge. But, those kind of things have also been the really great thing to entice people to come and be part of a really great experiment, because that opportunity to experiment and scale like that is from, I think a once in a lifetime piece. So it really also has enabled real creativity to be able to come to the fore in terms of that kind of scaling. So we've been able to, and I'm talking, in the past now, so use, really effective coaching canvas tools to think optimally, to think systemically, to optimise locally. So look at what are similar problems across the overall domain, because some problems are the same, and how can we look at the system rather than looking at things really as case by case. But I think they're the things. And then the other ugly piece in a big organisation is trying to stave off that panic at the first sign of trouble. So, something that happens that enables people to revert back to old behaviours. And, a Royal Commission, for example, is something that happens that has the potential to make an organisation think we need to actually go back to our old behaviours. And so that's when, some of those uglier behaviours come in.
And I'd like to sort of add on, I completely agree that we've known how to do at scale for a few teams, but the at scale when you have hundreds of teams is a pattern that I don't think we've done enough experimentation on, and I don't think there's a real appreciation as well on the journey of Agile. I mean, we took 15 years to get teams right and to experiment with what works with there. It's going to take a long time for us to experiment and actually learn what patterns work effectively at scale, because I don't think we actually have the science to back that level of scaling, what is effective and what is not effective at that scale yet.
I think, and this might be adding to Tom's point, something traditional like governance, when you're at that, I guess, early stage of an agile transformation, and you've got teams working in an agile way coming up against really traditional governance forums and things like that, and you've got people flipping out on both sides of the fence. And to be honest, I've probably had more trouble from dogmatic agile coaches in that environment than I've had from, you know, people within the organisation trying to work in a different way. I think I guess the message there, or the thing there, is you've got to learn to become as pragmatic as possible and almost become like an agile skeptic in a lot of ways, and go, is this the right way to work? Am I being dogmatic myself? You know, it's a step change, and you've got to bring people along for the journey, which is a cliche, but it's really true.
So a lot of those comments resonated. Also, unexpectedly, we've had to master the art of running events for many hundreds of people, and that wasn't something that I thought I would ever need to have in my kit bag, because comfortable with facilitation, when you've got hundreds of people, it's a different ballgame again. But it's quite satisfying at the same time to see a company actually working towards common goals. So it's both the good and the ugly. One thing that I'd like to add to that in terms of challenge is dependencies. So theoretically, we're all, we're running lots of trains, and they're all independent, and they can move along without reference to the rest of the organisation. But that's not our world. It just isn't our world. It's our organisation is really quite complex. And to unpick that in a way that would follow the theory rigidly just doesn't work for us. So we work all the time at how can we be better at minimising and managing the inevitable dependencies. And this is just not from an application development point of view, it's also from a business prioritisation. And one of the things that we've had in our last quarterly piece of work is that taking their newfound empowerment, some of our business portfolio reps are deprioritising pieces of work that someone else needs in order to launch their product or do something. And so that inevitable round robin of they did, you're kind of negotiating, mediating, and encouraging people to make those decisions in a more end-to-end way rather than a siloed way. And part of that's the system you create, and part of it is human behaviour that keeps working like that.
What I tend to find for when we talk about particularly ugly is that a lot of the organisations I've worked across they don't necessarily have a definitive goal to be one or the other. So we seem to find it very difficult, and I know a few people have talked about this, is that boundary between one and the other. And I've definitely seen, when I've seen the ugliest, a very siloed perspective. So say, for instance, things are just upgrades and changes tend to go through, in one particular organisation I've worked for, tend to go through that Scrum process, and then if it's a whole project, then it's going through waterfall, and then there seems to be this blurry line between things that are considered innovative, then they take on a whole nother perspective. So I find the blurred lines cause irritation between one to the other, and often one needs to connect to one, and we need fluidity to carry one to the next and one to the next. And I've found that being quite a particular struggle, and I think we could actually get a lot better at that.
Awesome. You're okay with what you said, Renee? Yeah, cool.
Questions?
Yeah, we've probably got some time to field some questions on ugliness in scaled agility. Actually, can I ask if there's a woman that has a question? I'll take that as a preference, if there are any. That's okay. Go for it.
So my question was, in certain companies, in certain contexts, like in specific projects, it might not always be the ideal case for an agile way of doing things. Have you ever seen anybody fall into the trap of making their project work agile, where it is not implemented? So rather than using agile as an enabler to build a project, have you seen people trying to fit their project into the agile methodology and thereby crashing sometimes?
So I'll just repeat that. Did you get that, Tony? Yeah, good. Okay, I won't repeat that.
So I think you're right in that within the framework perhaps you use, people tend to use agile meaning everything from mindset to how I'm going to work today. So on the latter part of that, sometimes I see people getting a bit overexcited and wanting to use that method to something that really doesn't need it. We do a lot of pen testing, for example, of our applications to make them safe. It's a thing, you just do it. On the other hand, can you have an agile mindset in the morning and a non-agile mindset in the afternoon? I don't think you can. So how you prioritise what's important for the company and how you coalesce an organisation around working towards those common goals, I think you have to be one or the other. But in terms of your work habits and that framework, then whatever's fit for purpose, I think, is very important.
I mean, the advice I give you is, like where I've seen it fail is where projects or teams are not understanding of what the constraints are. Like with any project, there might be constraints. There might be a particular technology. Maybe this thing can't be deployed every day, or maybe there's a customer and the customer wants to work in a particular way. And I think you can influence those things, but if they're not in your sphere of control, then trying to pretend like they are is a recipe for disaster. So I just advise you to understand the box within which you can control the process or the systems or your destiny, and where you can't, and the approach doesn't have to be the same for those two sides of the line.
I'll just say something quickly. I'll geek out on Cynefin for a second. I think we default to the complex quadrant a little too often. Sometimes things are more simple than we think. Sometimes things don't need long discovery or test and learn cycles. So it's about knowing where you are in that, I guess, situation. But I think some of the values are for me are universal. Getting closer to customers, collaborating better, and things like that. So I guess it echoes what Robin said. If we're talking about mindset and values, I think it can apply in almost all situations. But the way of working, is really dependent. Sorry.
No, you keep going to hand me that mic, Mark, but that's fine. You can hang on to it. Okay, well, let's claw ourselves out of the pit of despair and ugliness and now spend a few minutes talking about what's good. So what's great that you've seen that just has to be shared? What's inspirational? Let's bring us all back into a high note for the closing third.
So good for us is, I think, when we are working towards that common purpose. And this is usually not, incidentally, and maybe not surprisingly, not about saving money. It's usually about reaching some outcome. And our systems that we've developed so far at scale, when they work well, are allowing us to do that. We had last year a fairly significant problem with HFC. It was all through the papers, so I'm not giving any company secrets away. You may have even been affected by it yourself. So at a very strategic level, the company decided to pause on its rollout. And you can imagine for us, rolling out the network is seriously important. So it paused that to strategically move towards looking at customer impact and customer experience. That was a decision made at board level, at exec level, and our processes were working. And we had the translation of that strategy into changed work within weeks. And this is not because we knew how much it would all cost and we'd done the right business case. We actually didn't know what was going to solve the problem. But we were able to take that strategy and turn it into reality within a very short period of time. And so that kind of agility and responsiveness to change, when we have our systems working well at scale, that's the kind of benefit we get from them.
I'd probably call out two key things that I've seen that are really good. One's going to be quite controversial, but the first of which is I've had the experience of having an absolutely amazing leader at scale, someone who came from Silicon Valley. They knew about lean startup, they knew about design thinking, they were a huge advocate in the area that I was in, and they really encouraged this blend between business and IT, and so that it was fluid. No one actually knew where anyone came from, and no one really cared about it, and it was just a magical outcome. And they really led as a great servant leader and as an example of how to lead in an agile environment. And it makes such a difference when you have leadership who are switched on, who know actually how to do this properly. And the other controversial point that I'd make is it really helped in that scenario for us to actually have heavy standardisation, to have all the coaches aligned, and to actually have a heartbeat cadence where every single team across all 70 teams were actually delivering at the same pace so that we could manage dependencies. It was quite a critical success factor.
For me, the one that I saw that was probably springs to mind as being the nicest is a scale-up where a fairly large project group actually worked to scale region by region. So they maintained the same high-performing group, so they literally did one region at a time. Now, that's not to say that their first was worst and their last was the best, because they had practice, but it's that the same team took the process through region by region by region. So that meant there was quite a significant cost involved in doing that. But the benefit that the organisation got, because it was a very significant change right across the organisation, so the benefit was huge. So it definitely, they discovered at the end that it far outweighed the cost of moving that team around. So I can definitely say that was very worthwhile.
I'm going to go back to where I am at the moment as for an example, and I think we've gone. First of all, at Adaptivate, we have this little internal saying like we're making the elephant dance. We've taken this really risk-averse, massive mining organisation, and we haven't done it single-handedly. We've partnered with BCG, but we've gone from when we started, people would be late for a meeting and they'd go, "Hey, sorry, I'm late. I'm being agile." That was that kind of joke. Super awkward. As an agile coach sitting there in the room going, "Hey, yeah," to just the other week, being in a room with a bunch of program managers leading quite big programs, standing in front of a wall with sticky notes, and they made a decision and someone said, "You know what, this used to take us 4 weeks to make a decision like that, and we just made it in 10 minutes. So, you can have change in an organisation like that. You just got to kind of stick it out and, like I said before, be pragmatic and get those wins when you can.
I think the good that I've seen is one organisation I was working in that really understood the time it takes for the change to happen, and I think that's a really key point, because the change happens day by day, and it really takes a long time, and change is negotiated each day. And then the next piece on that, where good really happens, is similar to what you just said, where you have been talking to somebody about something for a long time, and then you see that behaviour happening. And I think at scale, that also, when you consider that happening with remote teams and remote coaches, etc., that's when you know that that's really being successful. So that's when I've seen really good change happening, and that's happened a lot in the last couple of years in my experience.
Yeah, maybe just lucky last, but if you just reflect on the REA story, when I joined REA, I've been there almost 9 years now, so I've been there quite a while. When I joined REA, it was 150 people in tech, now it's 650, so a massive scaling story. And I think, through that journey, the challenges changed every year, and I think it's kind of rising to the challenges as the organisation scales. And a lot of those challenges are actually not, processy challenges. They're certainly. You can't agile code yourself around technology constraints and organisational structures and a bunch of other things that happen in the org. So there's a bunch of stuff that we did over that time that enabled that agility that wasn't agile, if you know what I mean. But just to give you an example, we might, all our systems are now in the cloud. Cloud enables agility. So that's a technology tool that's enabled us to get to where we are. So maybe just to wrap that up, it's kind of address the challenges as they come as you scale. The approaches you apply when you've got one team are different to what you apply when you've got 10 teams, different to what you have when you have 100 teams.
So that comes to the end of our 3-act play. So we open the floor up to any questions or observations that anybody would like to share for anybody on the panel. So over to the audience. Raj.
Hello, I'll speak for all the organisations in Melbourne. I would say that I think depends. There are certainly similarities in terms of the journey that organisations go on. So in the beginning of a journey, depending on where, in terms of maturity levels. So you know, a couple of people talked here about, you know, a foundational level. So in organisations that I've worked in over the last 15 or so years, there is a point at which people they always start saying, I need training. And the first question is, what do you need training in? And they can't really articulate that, but they know they need some knowledge. And so then there's a point where there's a bit of a tango in terms of let's get some experiential learning first, and then we'll follow it up with some books to read, and then some actual training on the job, and then some classroom training. And then as people mature, then they're going to meet the next challenge. And you can sort of map the journey, which is more of a learning journey, as people mature in terms of what they're likely to need. And for me, I've been thinking about this a little bit recently because I've been mapping for the next role that I'm going into, what I'm kind of going to need in terms of the things that I need to prepare. And depending on where people are in the start of the journey, you're going to need different things. So I think there is a kind of a pattern that people can follow. I don't think it's the same for every organisation because there are organisational challenges that people have, but I think there are some things that are the same in terms of making sure that you've got people aligned from a vision point of view, make sure that people are aligned to strategy, make sure people understand that they come to work with a sense of purpose and leave with a sense of of completion, etc. So I think there's some similarities.
I'd say that a lot of organisations culturally, they're all different. Then neither are the same. They do have similar challenges, but what is the most important challenge at that point in time is almost always very different. And so applying cookie cutter, you know, we can apply this in every single organisation in this order is just, it's never going to work. You need to really be quite adaptable to both the culture and to the problems that the organisation's having and facing into at that point in time.
Perhaps, though, that there are some things which I think would be common in scaling, though, and one is addressing how the money works. Not that there's necessarily a common answer to that, but you do need to have an answer that is compatible with how you're asking your teams to work. And the other one I'm increasingly spending time on is how decision-making works. So in order to scale, a lot of our work has been moving that hierarchical, siloed decision-making to more horizontal and spending time with our senior execs saying, those decisions, they're yours, those strategy decisions. So could you please make them? But those things over here, step away. And making sure that that decision-making is clear and known. Otherwise, people sort of dive down and dive up, and that's just a bit confusing for everyone.
So we've got just 3 minutes left. So do we have any questions from ladies in the crowd? Any curiosity? I'll wait a bit longer for a woman to ask a question. Then any questions from anyone?
Yeah, just the panel, interesting to know from there's massive numbers of experience across the board. The approach of scaling an organization, does it change based on whether it's a product company and a service company? Are there any significant changes you could figure out in terms of approaching the kind of transformation?
I think it. Sorry, do you want to go? You go. I'll be quick then. I think it changes even between product companies. So I think my answer to that is just yes, it changes.
And I can honestly say it's huge. So if you imagine I'm at RMIT at the moment, and the previous company I was with was Red Cross Blood Services. So the level of regulation can have a huge impact on those things. Yes, definitely.
Any other questions? Katrina.
Go, Katrina.
Curious to know about scaling and learning within organisations, whether
Yeah, I don't know if it's easier or harder, but maybe I can talk to how we approach it. And so obviously when you've got a large team, training and learning and development is very important. But we have an organisational structure that doesn't follow career paths, if you know what I mean. We don't have like the developers over there and the BAs over there. We have cross-functional teams. So in order to kind of build community and build communities of practice, we just, kind of take the Spotify guild model where we've got lots of self-organised communities of practice that come together and develop the craft or whatever there might be. And actually increasingly we're putting an effort into bringing everybody together. So actually last week we had our internal tech conference, which is essentially runs like an internal tech conference. We had 70 submissions for papers for an internal conference, and that was a great kind of showcase of learning agility, I would say.
Really pressed for time, so it has to be super quick, please.
It was too quick. So, really quickly, because I'm working on one of the bigger transformations in Australia at the moment, what is the challenge between being prescriptive and giving the teams autonomy at scale? Because I find that quite difficult, and a lot of people have a lot of different views on that.
I think it's about finding the smallest number of common things that you need and using that framework. And we have this kind of jargon about freedom within a framework. The framework is as light and small as possible so that people can work with empowerment within it.
Thank you. We've run out of time, so let's leave it with Robin to having the last word there. Thank you very much for coming to this session and for your questions. I'd really like to thank the panel. I just realised that we've labelled them the good, the bad, and the ugly, and really they're actually they're really the bold and the beautiful. So I would like to say thank you very much to the panel.
Thanks, everyone. There's another session here if you're staying in this room. Otherwise, move to the next room. And don't forget to tune into the Weekly Reboot every Friday, 4 o'clock. Look for the Weekly Reboot in your podcast app.